when it comes to that scrutiny.
Right. We can recall the deposition played from the head of the ACLU. It's been a point of contention on whether they wrote the op-ed, Amber Heard wrote the op-ed, and her pledge or donation to give half of her divorce settlement of $7 million to the ACLU. So Depp had to actually sue the ACLU in order to retrieve those documents, those emails back and forth between Amber Heard, the ACLU, concerning those topics and issues. And so now we are learning and seeing, of course, online and in court documents that the ACLU is now suing Depp for $86,000 to recoup the cost of what it took to cover the production of all of those documents, Julia. So there's another battle brewing and going on between now the ACLU and Johnny Depp. And of course, the ACLU's testimony is so key to Depp's case, and just another twist in this saga.
Right, and what we were showing there on the screen was also a petition that many people have filed asking for her to be removed from the ACLU as an ambassador. So just another part of this story that has so many arms that don't necessarily have to do with what's happening inside of that deliberation room. Chanley, do we know what happens at the end of the day? Can jurors keep deliberating if they want to? I know they would have to forego dinner being provided to them, but would they be given a break?
You know, what we know is that the judge has told them we don't provide dinner and that they can still stay as long as they want to. We haven't heard her say anything about a potential break, but the deputy will knock on the door, usually around 5 o'clock in the evening, if they're still deliberating at that time, to inquire whether or not they want to stay. What do they want to do? They want to go home? They want to stay longer? What's up? And then we learn what's going to happen. Yesterday, they broke about 10 minutes or so earlier than normal for the evening, and of course, went home, and we just have to wait and see. Who knows what the jury's thinking or doing back there, but we're on standby for it all, Julia.
Standby. That is the buzzword of the day. Chanley Painter, thanks so much for all that information. I know it's long days for you, so be well, and we will check back in with you later. Joining me now to discuss all of this, forensic criminologist Dr. Laura Pettler in Monroe, North Carolina, and former prosecutor and trial attorney Vonda Sargent out of Seattle, Washington. Thank you both for being here. Let me start with you, Vonda. If you'll tell me what you think about this motion that the Depp team is filing, arguing that Heard shouldn't be able to tell this jury they need to send a message.
You know, Julia, that's an interesting motion. In my jurisdiction, if you do not object to that form of an argument, it's waived. Because that argument is so hard-hitting and impactful for a jury, oftentimes we have what is called a motion in limine to limit that very argument at the very onset of the trial. So before you even begin the trial, you move the court to forbid any sort of argument of that nature. I think that that was a mistake on Depp's team to not object right then and there and move for a sidebar or immediately move for it to be stricken. But the fact that the judge did not entertain it is appropriate. The case is before the jurors, and that's an issue, if he does not prevail, would be one that's raised on appeal. But once again, in my jurisdiction, he would lose that issue because they did not address that right when it happened. And that's something that if you don't object to it, you waive it.
That is a very important part of this. This is deliberations, but there may very well be an appeal in this case. Whose side it will be, we will see when this juror speaks. Right. Dr. Pettler, I want to ask you, I know you specialize in domestic violence staged murders as far as your forensic criminology and background. This being a case that has spoken so much about domestic violence, do you see an impact that it does have in the conversation surrounding abuse and what can happen when people are in these types of relationships?
Yes, absolutely, Julia. There has been a tremendous impact in the conversational realm for abuse and intimate partner violence. And I think one of the interesting aspects of this conversation is how it has launched the conversation about male victimization. And that victimization, as I've said many times on Court TV, does not know any boundaries whatsoever. And so anybody can can be a victim of intimate partner violence, whether it doesn't matter about age, it doesn't matter about race, it doesn't matter about religion. None of those things matter. It knows no boundaries. So it's very important that we recognize victimization. While yes, the primary population of intimate partner victims is obviously women, females, it does extend to males and men and everyone around the world that can be victimized by anyone else that they're in an intimate partner relationship with, for sure.
And regardless, you are completely right. Regardless of what the outcome of this case is, I think this is going to continue to be one of those cases that people do talk about in relation to these very sensitive issues that have been at the center of it. There have been many moments of levity in this trial. There have been alpacas outside of the courthouse, which we have not seen before, but absolutely some really important topics that this is raising awareness to all of the attention that has been on this trial. So when we have this motion that has been made by the DEP team arguing that it should be limited, we know they're making that legal argument that these jurors should just be focusing on the issue. And I don't know if we have the sound from Rottenborn actually telling the jury what they need to think about, but if we do, if we can play it and talk about it on the other side.
Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are absolutely overwhelming of abuse. One time, that's all you have to remember. Mr. Depp simply cannot prove to you that he never once abused Amber. And if you don't know, you have to return a verdict for Ms. Heard. A ruling against Amber here sends a message that no matter what you do as an abuse victim, you always have to do more. No matter what you document, you always have to document more. No matter whom you tell, you always have to tell more people. No matter how honest you are about your own imperfections and your own shortcomings in a relationship, you need to be perfect in order for people to believe you. Don't send that message. That's what he wants you to send.
Londa, as a former prosecutor, what do you make of his style in front of this jury?
I thought his style was great. His demeanor was fabulous. That argument that he got away with that is absolutely amazing to me. This whole idea that this jury is speaking on behalf of the entire issue of domestic violence, and he got away with arguing that, to me, is absolutely fascinating. That neither of the attorneys on Depp's side, I saw some physical reaction from Depp himself, but his attorneys just seemed to sit there. Going back to your answer, his style, it was slick. It was very slick for him to get that argument before that jury.
You know,
for those attorneys.
Right, these attorneys were not shy about their objections, so surprising that they weren't jumping all over him in that moment. But he mentioned victims having to document and that they shouldn't have to document things. So, Dr. Pettler, I want to ask you about that, because there was a lot of documentation in this case, not necessarily of abuse, but just of these partners documenting each other. Were you surprised at how much was coming out in this trial in front of this jury for this being a civil trial?
You know what, Julia, I think that this is the age of technology, right? And everyone has a camera in their hand every minute of the day, it seems. I'm sure that's not exactly true, but that's the way it feels sometimes. And it's easy these days to document anything, take pictures and video and audio of so many things. It's important to remember that intimate partner violence is closed room violence. It means that it normally happens behind closed doors, and sometimes the only two people that know what happened are the victim and the abuser. So in this case, we have some documentation, but it was not surprising to me, because in cases that we work in homicide and other types of death cases, we have lots and lots of male victims, we have lots and lots of female victims, and in all of those cases, there's typically these days a tremendous amount of technological digital forensic evidence, meaning audio, video, social media, and things like that that are that are part of our case files that we're looking at. Absolutely.
And we know this jury has a laptop inside of that deliberation room. They are able to pull up any of that audio or video that was played in court at any time that they want. So we are going to continue talking about this after the break. The jurors asked the court one question yesterday, and we're going to take a closer look at what the jury asked the court. What does it mean, and what does it have to do with Amber Heard's op-ed piece? You don't want to miss it.
Tried today.
There are three statements that we respectfully ask each of you to focus on. Statement number one, quote, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. Statement number two, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. Statement number three, quote, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse. He wanted out, which drove her to concoct, to make up a story that was designed to recast herself as an abuse survivor, with Mr. Depp as the alleged abuser.
That was Johnny Depp's attorney, Benjamin Chew, during opening statements, highlighting three key parts of Amber Heard's op-ed piece in the Washington Post. It's a piece that has sparked Depp to file this defamation lawsuit against his former wife. And yesterday, the jury gave us a little insight into what they might be thinking when they asked the judge a question regarding a jury instruction about Heard's piece. Let's take a listen.
It's basically in regards to number C, items 1 and 3, and number C is a jury instruction on the finding instruction for the online article title. The question is, does question number 3, the statement is false, pertain to the headline, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath, or does it pertain to the content of the statement, everything written in the op-ed? So I think the confusion came in this particular one because the statement in question is the title of the op-ed. So I think they're just confused as whether it's the whole op-ed or just the title is the statement. And it's clear that the title is the statement. So I was going to answer to say the title is the statement in question for number 3. Does that seem appropriate to everybody?
Which they've phrased as headline as opposed to title. But
right, because the headline is the alleged defamatory statement. So I can say the statement is the headline, and not the entire op-ed. Is that what you want me to say? All right.
Thank you.
The statement is the headline, not the entire op-ed. All right, I will send that back to them.
Still with me to discuss all of this, forensic criminologist Dr. Laura Pettler in Monroe, North Carolina, and former prosecutor and trial attorney Vonda Sargent in Seattle, Washington. That's the only thing that we have heard from the jury so far, the one peep out of them. Nothing so far today. They've been going for 12 hours and 38 minutes in total now. Dr. Pettler, I know you've watched a lot of trials and been involved in trials. Any thoughts on what this may mean about where the jury is in their thinking?
You know, I always say that the jury is the most unpredictable, quote unquote, animal in the world, and I believe that. And in many trials, we are surprised by what they're thinking and what they're doing in there when they finally come out and render a verdict. And I think that in this case, there's so many different ways that it could go. And I cannot imagine, you know, the challenges that they are facing back there to understand everything that they heard, not only from the evidence standpoint, but the arguments in opening statement and then the closing argument, and then all of the legal aspects of all of that to try to tie that together. To me, if I was a juror in this case and I had never been around any kind of a court proceeding, I would find it challenging to balance all of those things and to come up with answers for every single thing, for sure. So I think that they're just going through it all and making sure they're doing a good job. I think time is showing that they care and that they want to do this right.
And Vonda, what do you make of where they are in their deliberations if they're asking this question, and does it give you any insight into what may be going on in that deliberation room?
No, I agree with Dr. Pettler. There's absolutely no way to determine what a jury is thinking based on a question. Even if there's a series of questions, you have, over a half dozen people in a room that are coming in there with their own life experiences, with their own belief system, with their own ideas about what is or isn't true. And merely asking a question is not any insight into anything. They simply wanted to know the answer to that question, but it certainly isn't going to give us any idea of who it is that they might be ruling in favor of, or who they might be thinking is telling the truth. It's like herding cats. You just can't know. They're people. They're taking their time. They're being deliberate, and that's what we want jurors to do. We want jurors to understand, and if they don't understand, we want them to ask a question. But to try to believe that we can affix some sort of meaning or some sort of understanding to a question is simply just us trying to read tea leaves. We just can't.
Exactly it. And to your point about them being deliberate, I want to tell our viewers that jury instruction packet that they have, that they're going through, what they are referencing in their question is about on page 4, but there are 38 pages in total. No idea to know if they are going through each instruction page by page, but that is just where that instruction falls in the packet that we know they are likely going through, but likely a very meticulous group. One thing that question does raise is that they are looking at the difference between the headline of that article and the context of the entire article, because they ask whether or not they have to consider the context of the entire article. But you heard the judge. No, they are just supposed to look at the statement that's in the headline, but they have heard the entire article. It was put out in front of them at the very beginning of this case. Let's take a look back to Amber Heard's attorneys, making sure they know the full picture in opening arguments.
I was exposed to abuse at a very young age. I knew certain things early on without ever having to be told. I knew that men have the power, physically, socially, and financially, and that a lot of institutions support that arrangement. I knew this long before I had the words to articulate it, and I bet you learned it young too. Like many women, I had been harassed and sexually assaulted by the time I was of college age. But I kept quiet. I did not expect filing complaints to bring justice, and I didn't see myself as a victim. Then, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out. Imagine a powerful man as a ship, like the Titanic. That ship is a huge enterprise. When it strikes an iceberg, there are a lot of people on board desperate to patch up holes. Not because they believe in or even care about the ship, but because their own fates depend on the enterprise. In recent years, the Me Too movement has taught us about how power like this works, not just in Hollywood, but in all kinds of institutions, workplaces, places of worship, or simply in particular communities. In every walk of life, women are confronting these men who are buoyed by social, economic, and cultural power, and these institutions are beginning to change. I write this as a woman who had to change my phone number weekly because I was getting death threats. For months, I rarely left my apartment. And when I did, I was pursued by camera drones and photographers on foot, on motorcycles and in cars. Tabloid outlets that posted pictures of me spun them in a negative light. I felt as though I was on trial in the court of public opinion, and my life and livelihood depended on myriad judgments far beyond my control. I want to ensure that women who come forward to talk about violence receive more support. We are electing representatives who know how deeply we care about these issues. We can work together to demand changes to laws and rules and social norms, and to right the imbalances that have shaped our lives.
Dr. Pettler, when you're hearing the way that this article is laid out, without any other evidence, without any other arguments around it, and thinking of the cultural implications when it comes to a case like this, an argument like this, what's your take on how it sounds by itself?
Well, not considering anything else, it definitely conveys to me that Amber Heard is a victim of intimate partner violence, and she is telling her story. And so to just look at the op-ed itself that is what I see and I hear. And I literally all day long, every day, 5 days a week, spend my time working on intimate partner homicides and intimate partner related death cases where the manner of death is in question. And all of this is part of my normal daily work. So if you read just that op-ed, it conveys that she is asserting herself as an intimate partner violence victim and nothing else.
Vonda, one of our guests pointed out something interesting about this headline and wondering whether the jury has issue with the fact that sexual violence is mentioned in it, whether they're grappling with whether she was a victim of domestic abuse, whether it was verbal, whether it was emotional, whether it was physical, and then whether it was actually sexual violence as referenced in that title. We know that on the stand, Amber Heard talked about a horrific type of abuse with a bottle where she says she was sexually abused by Depp. When thinking about this jury looking at all of this information, do you think that they may be grappling with that part of it? And is it a problem that the judge didn't define domestic abuse for them in these jury instructions?
I do, Julie, think that that is an issue. I think that there should have been some education of the jurors on what domestic violence is. Through my training and experience as a former prosecutor, I learned that oftentimes male perpetrators of domestic violence, after engaging in the violent act, would have a sexual release. And that was part of the sexual abuse that would occur after the physical abuse or even the emotional abuse. So I think that was an error. I think that that should have been done. I would agree with Dr. Pettler that just looking at that and listening to that op-ed, it does just sound like Amber Heard is telling her story as a survivor of domestic abuse. And sexual abuse oftentimes does follow physical and emotional violence in intimate partnerships. And it does show not only the issues that she faces, but the institutional support that is given more often to men. I'm not saying that women aren't perpetrators of domestic violence, but oftentimes men don't report it because they're then viewed as weak or some other very derogatory terms that are associated with women. So that support for women oftentimes isn't institutionalized like it is for men. And that's what I hear when I hear those words from that op-ed. Nothing specific about Johnny Depp, but once again, that's what the trial's about. But that's what I hear from that op-ed.
Right, you are right. He was not named in it, and these jurors are having to determine whether it was defamation by implication, whether she understood that she was defaming him and that it was implied. We're going to talk a lot more about this still ahead. We've seen a handful of familiar faces take the witness stand there in Fairfax County over the course of this 6-week trial, including some surprise witnesses. We're going to take a look at some of those major players coming up next.
At joincalibrate.com.
We have breaking news out of Fairfax County, Virginia, in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. The jury has let the court know they have a verdict. Those 7 men and women have been deliberating for 12 hours and 48 minutes, and that clock is stopped because they have been informed that they've reached a decision. And the way the court is going to handle this, they're going to give an hour or so to these parties to come back to the courthouse to gather, convene, and then that verdict is going to be read on the record at 3 o'clock Eastern. Our teams are standing by for any movement inside of that courtroom, and we will be getting you a live report from on the ground. But still with me to react to this news of a verdict after 3 days of deliberation, forensic criminologist Dr. Laura Pettler in Monroe, North Carolina, and former prosecutor and trial attorney Vonda Sargent in Seattle, Washington. Your reaction, Dr. Pettler, to us having a verdict now 3 days after this jury has been looking over this case?
I think, we were going back to what we were talking about earlier, Julia, about what are they thinking? What are they doing? And it's very clear that they have taken this extremely seriously, which, of course, all of us can be grateful for that because we want juries to take their jobs very, very seriously. The fact that they have had 12 hours of time to talk, that's a long time to talk to anybody about anything. So all of them coming together unanimously unanimously. It's good news. It's good news, I think, for everybody that we have a verdict. It's going to be read shortly, and everybody's going to be able to then move to the next phase of this process.
Vonda Sargent, this is a high-profile case. This is one that millions of people have been watching very closely. They've been commenting about. They have been stopping everything to see what happens in this case, and we now have a verdict. Talk to me about your reaction to there being a verdict, what you expect to happen in that courtroom, and the possible larger impact of what we hear.
What I expect to happen in the courtroom is pure chaos. I think people are going to clamor to the courtroom, and it's going to be that circus that has been this trial. I think the large reaction is going to be profound disappointment on one side and joy on the other. I just really don't know what it is they've decided. I'm not surprised, given that they asked for a bifurcated lunch hour. That to me was the first signal that, oh, they're starting to try to wrap this up. But trying to figure out what side that they came down on, I just don't know. But it's going to have a profound impact on our society. Or I don't know if it will on our culture, but definitely it's going to impact, the people that are in the Heard camp or the people that are in the Depp camp. It will have an impact. Whether the impact is positive or negative, that'll be seen.
Interesting that you point out they did ask for that bifurcated lunch. They only wanted a short lunch. They wanted to get back to deliberations, and they've only been back in that room less than an hour. So that really may speak to what they were thinking before they even took that lunch break, how close they were. We know today from Chanley Painter, who is there in Fairfax County, Virginia, that the crowds outside have been a lot lower in number than they have in previous days because people really didn't know that a verdict was coming. We've seen the video of people standing outside, how many people have been waiting overnight. They've had their tents and their sleeping bags waiting to make sure that they are in line for this, but likely not knowing that there would be a verdict, but also not knowing if they would get a glimpse of really the celebrity that the majority of those people were there supporting, and that's Johnny Depp. And we've been reporting about the fact that he is no longer in the country. This is a look at the lines yesterday, and we know today as well, they only gave out about 26 wristbands, and that's how people are getting into the courtroom. That's how they are being able to watch this. So yesterday, much shorter, not the long lines that we have seen many days of this 6-week trial. So interesting to see or ask our team on the ground when we get the chance whether people are getting those notifications on their phone and whether they're making their way to the courthouse now that they know that there is a verdict and how the court is going to handle this. Absolute kudos to that court team, because I can imagine they haven't seen anything quite like this in the way that they have had to secure things there at the courthouse. I do want to play a clip, if we have it, of what we know of the whereabouts of Johnny Depp. We know that his illegal team is there on the ground. They arrived this morning. They left to take a lunch break, and they would be notified when the verdict came in. But he is not in the country. We actually know that he is on a tour of sorts. He's there playing with Jeff Beck in the United Kingdom, and that is scheduled to continue to go on until about June 7th is the report that we're getting. So no plans from Depp to be here for this verdict, but will Amber Heard be there inside of the courthouse when this verdict comes down? We don't know. Dr. Pettler, anything about the optics of that, of Amber Heard, the one who is being sued, possibly being in the courthouse? We don't know, but possibly being there in the courtroom, because we don't have any reports that she has left the country or the vicinity, and Johnny Depp, the one who brought this suit, not being anywhere in sight.
Yes, I think that it definitely has a particular look, Julia, for sure. In my opinion, I would have definitely been there had I been the one to bring the lawsuit. I would have been there to also hear the verdict. The jury has spent 6 weeks listening to my case in chief, so to speak, and then the defendant's case in chief, and then vice versa with all the counterclaims and all of the things that were going on. personally, I would have been there for the verdict. And I think that it looks it definitely has a particular look for Johnny Depp to not be there. It was, of course, his choice. He waived his right to be there for the verdict and anything else that he didn't have to be there for. But I don't know if that's going to end up playing a role for him positively or negatively, or absolutely no role whatsoever.
Speaking of no role, Vonda, we just talked about the high-profile nature of this case. You're a trial prosecutor, former prosecutor rather, trial attorney. And I want to talk to you about the scene inside of that courtroom on the last day of closing arguments when this jury was not in the room, but still inside of this court of law. These spectators who were there in the gallery, they were cheering and waving at Johnny Depp. It looked like he was outside of a concert in the way that he was exiting, and that was permitted. Is that strange to you to know that this was going on inside of court?
Yes, not only strange, but I thought it to be extraordinarily inappropriate. I would have, if I had been Depp's counsel, I would have asked the court to disallow that. I mean, my whole case is that he's been defamed and that his celebrity has been impacted based on Ms. Heard's conduct or alleged conduct. Yet he is getting all of this love and adoration, and he's jetting around the country on breaks. I would want to have my client just a bit more subdued and at least looking the part as though this has had an impact on his celebrity, which is what he is saying. That, you know, I've been defamed and my name is being ruined and I've been run through the mud and I can't get work. And he's now on stage strumming a guitar at a concert. So the optics of it don't cut in support of his claim. But once again, as Dr. Pettler said, who knows whether the jury is going to take any of that into consideration.
It's quite the scene there.
It certainly doesn't look right.
Right,
Yeah.
we were just showing it there on the screen. A follow-up question to that, Vonda, is that, you know, he said it wasn't about the money. So it's him not being there showed that it wasn't even really about the jury's verdict. Was this about him being able to tell his story, which he has said repeatedly?
You know, I don't know. I don't know Johnny Depp at all, and I don't know what he means by telling his story, but looking and listening at some of the things that were said about Amber and that were said about him, it seemed to be a bit more about punishment, about retribution, retaliation. I don't know, though. I don't know the intimacies of their relationship other than what was said, but it just seemed, and I said this at the very onset, before the trial even started, shouldn't have happened. It seemed, and I'm not at any point in time saying that domestic violence is petty, and that's not what I'm trying to convey, but it appeared to me some of the things and some of the actions, in my opinion, of Mr. Depp, borderline pettiness, borderline retribution, retaliation, power moves. And that's just my opinion, and I'm not talking about domestic violence survivors or even perpetrators as a group. I'm talking about this specific instance. So I think that his conduct and his actions, to me, do not support what it is he's saying that he suffered at the hands of Amber Heard. That's my opinion.
Vonda and Dr. Pettler, thank you so much for your insight. If you are just joining us, to recap, we do have a verdict in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. That verdict is going to be read at 3 o'clock. We will take you live into the courtroom when that happens. We are also getting word from sources close to Johnny Depp to tell us about his whereabouts right now. We'll have that on the other side of the break.
Heal my son.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. You are watching breaking news along with us out in Fairfax County, Virginia, in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. The verdict is in, and we are going to hear that verdict read into the record at 3 o'clock Eastern today. Our teams are standing by there in Fairfax County, Virginia at the courthouse, and any movement that happens inside of the courtroom, we will bring it to you live. This is a case that took over 100 hours of testimony in front of the jury. It's one that took 6 weeks, and now after 3 days and 12 hours worth of deliberations from this jury of 7, they have reached their decision. Let's take a look back at this case and how we got here to this point.
Boom!
hearts.
Johnny Depp, the star of such blockbuster franchises like Pirates of the Caribbean,
I'm so sorry, were you still talking?
was one of Hollywood's highest paid actors, commanding tens of millions per film.
He's exactly what you want to be if you want to be a Hollywood A-lister.
Elizabeth Wagmeister is chief correspondent at Variety magazine.
You want to be family friendly, you want to be taken seriously by the industry, and you want to have a bit of sex appeal when it comes to your personal brand. But of course, this entire trial really changed the whole face of Johnny Depp's reputation.
The trial, Depp versus Amber Heard. This once married couple has been feuding since they split in 2016, and the drama has spilled into courts in the U.S. and overseas. Here in Fairfax, Virginia, the two square off in this courthouse. Depp is suing his ex-wife Amber Heard for defamation. He claims she damaged his reputation when she wrote about domestic abuse in this op-ed that appeared in the Washington Post in December 2018. Depp wasn't named in the article, but he claims in his lawsuit that the article implied he abused her, and as a result, he has lost movie roles and faced public scorn.
Any defamation case has a difficult road to hoe, but in this one, I think it has a particularly difficult chance of success.
George Freeman was in-house counsel at the New York Times for more than 30 years and is now executive director of the Media Law Resource Center.
The first defense really is the most basic defense in libel law, which is truth.
In order for Depp to win, he not only has to prove that the allegations are false, but that Heard acted with malice or intentionally lied about the alleged abuse.
So he really has to prove that she made it up out of whole cloth. And I think that's a stretch to ask a jury with all the evidence that exists, to ask a jury to believe that she made it up and she wasn't abused at all is a very, very hard burden to meet.
Depp has already lost a similar libel case in London. He sued The Sun for calling him a, quote, wife beater. A judge there found that the newspaper had proved the article was substantially true. But the U.S. trial will be different. A jury will decide the case, not a judge, and his appeal among fans could be a factor.
He knows that he has a large fan base, even throughout this entire legal battle. So Johnny Depp could also feel empowered by knowing that he does still have a fan base behind him.
Depp's case is unusual for another reason, according to Freeman.
Johnny Depp sued Amber Heard in this case, but not the Washington Post. Generally speaking, in 9 out of 10 cases, in a libel case, you sue the media that publishes as well as the person who's making the accusation. Yet he never sued the Washington Post in this case, which leads to the conclusion that this is really, in the end, a marital fight that has now grown into the American court system.
That was a look back at this case, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. If you're just joining us, we have a verdict in that case, and it's going to be read on the record there in Fairfax County, Virginia at 3 o'clock. We are standing by to bring you whatever happens inside of that courtroom live. I want to bring in our two guests who have been with us following this, Dr. Pettler and Vonda Sargent. Also want to read a statement that we have gotten from a source close to Johnny Depp about his whereabouts, confirming that due to previously scheduled work commitments made before the trial, Mr. Depp will not be physically present for today's 3 p.m. verdict and will be watching from the United Kingdom. It's what we suspected, knowing that he was in concert yesterday, and it's even been widely reported that Kate Moss, his ex-girlfriend, was there with him at that concert. Dr. Pettler, I want to ask you very quickly, and I'll ask Vonda Sargent this next as well. Regardless of the outcome in this case, what do you want people to take away from this case? We have about 10 seconds.
I simply want people to be aware that the conversation regarding IPV needs to continue, and us as a country need to unite to protect people and to keep everybody safe.
Vonda Sargent, same question, about 10 seconds as well.
I would agree. I think that we need to continue to talk about domestic violence. I think we need to believe victims regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, regardless of their socioeconomic status. When people say they're being hurt, I think we need to believe them.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your insights. We have to step aside. We're reaching the bottom of the hour. Judge Ashley is here, is going to take place here on the steps. Judge Ashley, thanks.
All right.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Julia Janae. Thank you so much. What excellent coverage. Listen, we have a verdict. It's breaking news. It's big news. 3 statements for each side that this jury had to consider. A long verdict form. What have they done? Stay with us. All your continuing coverage here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice. Breaking news in the Depp defamation trial. We have a verdict. It will be announced today at 3 p.m. Eastern, just 1 hour from now. Of course, Court TV cameras will take you live into the courtroom for the jury's decision. We have a live report from Fairfax, Virginia in just a moment. And throughout this hour, we are discussing how likely it is that Johnny Depp committed at least one act of domestic violence.
I remember he chest bumped me in this bro-y way.
Johnny had already grabbed Amber by the hair with one hand and was whacking her repeatedly in the face.
She had pretty significant visible facial injuries.
Did something happen to you? Morning? I don't think so.
Occasionally I'd see bruising, cut lips, split lips.
Next move, if I don't walk away, it's just gonna be a bloodbath.
Johnny Depp may be winning in the court of public opinion, but he could easily lose this defamation case. The beloved actor waved to an adoring gallery after testimony concluded last week, but victory is far from assured. If the jurors believe that he abused Amber Heard just once, she wins. Our legal experts are standing by for all of our expert analysis coming up. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Judge Ashley Wilcott, honored to be with you this Wednesday afternoon, where we are beginning with our breaking news live to Fairfax, Virginia, where Court TV's own lead anchor Vinnie Politan and Chanley Painter are outside the courthouse. All right, both of you, huge news, this verdict at 3 o'clock. Chanley, let me start with you, if I could please. Tell us the latest of what's happening at the courthouse, given we now know the jury has reached a verdict.
Right, excitement at an all-time high. We've been waiting 12 hours, right, Vinny, for this verdict. To my right, to my left, we have camera after camera after camera, media from all over the world here, Ashley, to cover this verdict. There's a media gaggle to my left with cameras waiting for any reaction. So once the verdict is read at 3 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, inside the courthouse behind us, we expect that either side, either Depp or Heard's team, or even maybe the jurors, Vinny, would want to say anything. They're going to come directly outside here. Our cameras are set up, ready to go, and for all the others, they're making their way inside that courtroom to watch this verdict.
All right, Vinny, you know, all the trials you've covered, all the trials that I'm familiar with as a former judge, you never really know what a jury's going to do. I believe in our jury system. They deliberate, they pay attention, they come out with the right outcome based on the evidence they've heard. But knowing we really can't predict what the jury's going to do, how does either outcome affect not just this trial and the parties, but everyone who's been watching this?
Well, I think it's a huge verdict in many respects because of the investment, right? First, you've got behind us in the courtroom, in the courthouse, the investment of the parties, the investment of the attorneys who have put so much time, the investment of the jury to speak the truth about what happened in this relationship. Then you've got the incredible investment of the public who has watched this play out. They all have opinions, strong opinions, but it's not just about this case. It's about defamation. It's about domestic abuse. It's about the rights of accusers, the rights of those who believe they've been wrongly accused. So there's really a lot at stake here. And as we sit here after 12 hours of deliberations after a 6-week trial, I would say this tends to be on the quicker side. This was not a long deliberation by any means. I would say it was a little bit quick. Who does that favor in this moment? Who would perhaps be able to reach this jury quicker with what they want to say? And it's tough. If this jury approached the case in terms of he said, she said. Who do I believe? I believe him or I believe her, and that's who's going to win this case. I think that's advantage Johnny in a quick deliberation. But if they're looking and going through this verdict form and going through how difficult it is for either side to prove defamation in the United States of America involving a public figure, then it could be advantage nobody wins, that there's not defamation on either side. So as I sit here, those are the two things going through my mind at this time. It depends, from my perspective, how they approached this deliberation. But the bottom line, it came quick.
Right, and I know, Vinny, you were on with me yesterday and describing in criminal trials the Politan theorem, and really you predicted tomorrow is when this jury might come back. Let's break it down a little bit more to all of the great points that you just made, and that is talking about the verdict form, because, Chanley, this jury had verdict forms where they had 3 statements on each side to consider, and let's look at all the possibilities with you both, if I could, please, and that is, it could be that they come back and say, based on the verdict, based on the 3 statements for each side, that both lied about the other, and therefore they're both guilty of defamation. Or in the alternative, they might say, oh, nope, neither of you lied. We find everything was true, and as a result, you both lose. I mean, how many different options are there before this jury, Chanley?
There are several options. You're correct. This is an 8-page verdict form. 3 statements at issue for Johnny Depp that he says were a part of that 2018 Washington Post op-ed that Amber Heard defamed him, defamation by implication. So 3 statements there. Then 3 statements that Amber Heard countersued Depp for regarding statements his attorney, his agent, Adam Waldman, made against Amber Heard. So they had to, for each of these statements, run through, Vinny, hold it up for us, Vinny. We have 7 different subparts of the elements of defamation that this jury had to come to a unanimous yes or no for each of those subparts. If all of those subparts, Ashley, for each of those statements was a yes, then and only then would this jury move to consider damages for defamation. So there's so many different ways that this verdict, or verdicts, if we want to call them, Vinny, could go. They could find in favor for only one of those 3 statements for Johnny Depp, right, Vinny? Or one of the statements for Amber Heard, or none of the statements at all, or all of the statements.
Yeah, I think the most surprising verdict, from my perspective, would be an all-out win for either side.
Right.
Johnny Depp wins, gets $50 million. Amber Heard wins, gets $100 million. To me, that would surprise me. It could happen. It absolutely could happen, either one. But to me, that would be the most surprising. To me, the most likely verdict is some form of a compromise, a punt. Either you find liability, but there's no damages, or you find no liability on either side. So there's a wide array, many different ways this jury can go about it. But the fact that they've been out for 12 hours, Ashley, tells me that there wasn't a ton of fighting inside that jury room. A little less room or time needed for compromise. It seems like this is where you could go through this in 12 hours and answer the questions and not have those big fights, breakdowns where we've got to say, okay, I'll give you claim 1 if you give me claim 2, or I'll go with the claim, but we're not giving any damages. I think they agreed. I think these 7 people agreed. I don't think this is going to necessarily be a compromise verdict because of the nature of it coming out after just 12 hours.
Absolutely. And they took a shorter lunch today, Vinny. That probably meant that they had it ready to go. They took a short lunch, and then, of course, we get the announcement that they reached.
I've seen it so many times, where they reach the verdict before lunch, get that last meal in, just a little bit of time. Let's just think about it. Okay, they come back after lunch, and then shortly thereafter, they make the announcement that they've reached a verdict, which is exactly what happened today. And they asked for the shorter lunch today.
They did.
Like, if you're in the middle of a battle, you're going to want a longer lunch, Ashley.
I agree. I just had to say, Vinny, that's what I thought. When you all said it was a shorter lunch, I thought, uh-oh, this means they're close to a verdict. So many options, 12 hours. We know that they've been deliberating before they reached a decision, that decision coming at 3 o'clock today. And I have to say this, too, when you talk about damages.